The Reconquista. The Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212 marked a decisive turning point. The Almohad political system in Iberia weakened, while the Christian kingdoms of the north entered a period of extraordinary territorial expansion. Castile pushed deep into the Guadalquivir Valley. Córdoba fell in 1236. The Crown of Aragon, under James I, conquered the Muslim Kingdom of Valencia, with Valencia itself falling in 1238. Aragonese expansion had already reached the Balearic Islands, beginning with Mallorca in 1229. Seville fell to Castile in 1248. Portugal completed the conquest of the Algarve during the 13th century, establishing most of the territorial outline of modern Portugal. By the middle of the 13th century, Christian kingdoms controlled almost the entire Iberian Peninsula. But there was an important distinction between political conquest and demographic replacement. The Christian armies conquered territory. They did not simply remove every Muslim who lived there. Millions of people did not suddenly disappear when their city changed rulers. In many conquered territories, Muslim peasants, craftsmen, merchants, and landowners remained where they were. The political map had changed dramatically. The population had not. Only one major independent Muslim state remained. The Kingdom of Granada, c. 1230s 1492. The Nasrid Kingdom of Granada survived for approximately 250 years. It occupied the mountainous southeastern corner of Iberia and included the city of Granada, which eventually became one of the most spectacular centers of Islamic architecture in Europe. Granada survived partly because of its geography. The mountains surrounding the kingdom made conquest difficult and gave its rulers defensible territory. But geography alone does not explain its longevity. The Nasrids became skilled diplomats. Granada alternated between warfare, tribute payments, alliances, and negotiations with the Christian kingdoms. Its rulers sometimes acknowledged the political superiority of Castile and paid tribute in exchange for peace. The kingdom also maintained connections with Muslim North Africa. For more than 2 centuries, therefore, Christian Iberia and Muslim Granada existed alongside one another in an unstable political balance. This was not permanent peace. Border warfare was common, raids crossed the frontier, prisoners were captured, and individual towns changed hands. But neither side possessed the ability, or always the desire, to destroy the other completely. Muslims under Christian rule, the Mudéjars. One of the most important facts about the later Reconquista is that Christian conquest did not initially mean the immediate expulsion of Muslims. Muslim communities remained throughout territories conquered by Christian rulers. They became known as Mudéjars, a term generally associated with Muslims who remained under Christian rule. Their precise rights varied according to location, period, and the terms under which their community surrendered. In some places, Muslims were allowed to retain mosques, religious practices, local customs, property, and elements of Islamic law governing their communities. They often continued speaking Arabic or Romance languages and maintained distinctive forms of architecture, agriculture, crafts, and commerce. The situation was not one of modern religious equality. Muslims living under Christian rule occupied a subordinate legal and political position, and restrictions could be imposed upon them. Their status could also deteriorate over time. Nevertheless, the existence of large Muslim communities under Christian rule demonstrates why the Reconquista should not be described simply as a centuries-long process in which Christian armies conquered territory and immediately removed its Muslim population. The reality was considerably more complicated. The same was true of Jewish communities. Jewish populations had lived in Iberia since antiquity and remained under both Muslim and Christian rulers. Jewish communities played important roles in commerce, medicine, scholarship, administration, and finance. For centuries, Iberia was therefore home to Christians, Muslims, and Jews living under different political and legal arrangements. Sometimes that coexistence was relatively peaceful. At other times it was marked by discrimination, violence, forced conversion, and persecution. The situation changed dramatically toward the end of the 15th century. The final Reconquest. 1469, Ferdinand and Isabella. In 1469, Isabella of Castile married Ferdinand of Aragon. Their marriage united the dynasties of the two most powerful Christian kingdoms in Iberia. It is important not to describe this as the instantaneous creation of modern Spain. Castile and Aragon remain separate political entities with their own institutions, laws, taxation systems, and traditions. But their dynastic union created a formidable political and military partnership. The new monarchs inherited the unresolved conflict with Granada. By the late 15th century, Granada was increasingly isolated. The Christian kingdoms were stronger, wealthier, and more politically consolidated than they had been during the earlier centuries of the Reconquista. The Nasrid Kingdom, meanwhile, was suffering from internal dynastic divisions. The opportunity for a final conquest had arrived. 1482 to 1492, the Granada War. The final war began in 1482. Over the following decade, Castilian forces gradually captured the territory surrounding Granada. The war was not one continuous siege. It involved campaigns against individual cities and fortresses, shifting alliances, internal divisions within Granada, and negotiations. The Nasrid dynasty itself was divided. Muhammad XII, known in Spanish tradition as Boabdil, became entangled in a struggle for power with other members of his own family. The Christian monarchy exploited these divisions while steadily tightening the pressure on Granada. By 1491, the remaining kingdom was effectively surrounded. Granada surrendered. On January 2, 1492, Boabdil formally handed the city over to Ferdinand and Isabella. After nearly 8 centuries of changing political boundaries, Muslim rule over an independent Iberian state had ended. The Reconquista was conventionally complete. But the story did not end with the fall of Granada. In some ways, the most consequential chapter was only beginning. 1492, conquest does not immediately mean religious purge. The surrender of Granada did not initially require every Muslim inhabitant to leave. The Treaty of Granada contained substantial protections for the Muslim population. Muslims were promised the right to maintain their religion, mosques, property, customs, and certain legal practices. In other words, the Christian monarchy initially accepted the existence of a large Muslim population within its newly conquered territory. The arrangement was not entirely unprecedented. Christian rulers had governed Muslim populations elsewhere in Iberia for centuries. But Granada represented something new. It was the last independent Muslim state, and its conquest brought a large Muslim population directly under the authority of the monarchs who were simultaneously pursuing greater religious and political uniformity. The original settlement therefore contained a fundamental tension. Could a newly unified Christian monarchy permanently tolerate a large Muslim population that maintained its own religion and institutions? Increasingly, the answer was no. 1499 to 1501, the Granada Revolt and the breakdown of the settlement. The first major breakdown came during the late 1490s. The Crown had initially pursued policies of conversion through missionary efforts, but tensions increased as Christian authorities attempted to accelerate the conversion of Granada's Muslims. The arrival of Francisco Jiménez de Cisneros, the powerful Archbishop of Toledo and confessor to Isabella, marked an escalation. Cisneros favored much more aggressive methods of conversion than the earlier arrangements had envisioned. Pressure on Muslim communities contributed to resistance. In 1499, rebellion broke out in parts of Granada. The revolt spread through several areas before being suppressed by royal forces. The rebellion became a crucial turning point. The Crown argued that rebellion had invalidated the original surrender arrangements. Instead of continuing to treat Granada's Muslims as a protected religious community, the monarchy increasingly pursued conversion. By 1501, the remaining Muslims of Granada were confronted with conversion or departure. The original guarantees of religious autonomy had effectively collapsed. 1502, Islam prohibited in Castile. In 1502, the monarchy extended the conversion or expulsion policy to Muslims living in the Crown of Castile. Muslims were required to convert to Christianity or leave Castile. This represented a fundamental transformation. The monarchy was no longer merely conquering Muslim territory. It was attempting to create a religiously unified Christian society. Those Muslims who converted became known increasingly as Moriscos. Some converted sincerely. Others maintained Islamic beliefs privately. Still others occupied an uncertain middle ground, adopting Christian practices while retaining elements of their previous culture and religious traditions. This created a new problem for the Spanish monarchy. The question was no longer simply, who controls the territory? The question became, are these people genuinely Christian? That distinction would shape Spanish policy for more than a century.